It's April 11th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with South Korea's 22nd general elections. The main opposition Democratic Party secured a safe majority in the National Assembly, winning 161 out of 254 directly contested seats. The ruling People Power Party won 90 seats. And we head straight over to the National Assembly to get the latest election updates. We also have an expert analysis of what the election results mean for this country. At the Biden-Kishida summit in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, U.S. President Joe Biden for the first time says he backs Japan's outreach to North Korea and that he's still open to talks with the regime's leader, Kim Jong-un. Most of the ballots for 22nd general election of South Korea have been counted by now, with the makeup of the new parliament taking shape. Our National Assembly correspondent Ishu explains a breakdown of the 300 seats.
It's been a gripping night with people and the lawmaker candidates closely watching the results of the ballot count slowly take shape. By 7 a.m. on Thursday, 99.8% of the ballots deciding local district representatives were counted. According to national broadcaster KBS, out of 254 possible seats representing local districts, the main opposition Democratic Party of Korea took 161, the ruling People Power Party 90, while there was one seat each for the minor Saemildae, New Reform, and Jinbo parties. As for the 46 proportional representation seats, with 97.6% of the ballots counted by 7 a.m., the PPP satellite People Future Party secures 16 seats, while the DP satellite party, the Democratic United Party of Korea, including candidates from the Jinbo Party, secured 12. From minor camps, the Rebuilding Korea Party, launched by former Justice Minister Cho Guk, won 11 seats, while the New Reform Party, led by the former PPP leader Lee Jun-seok, won 1. This means that in total, the DP and its satellite occupy more than the majority of the new assembly with 173 seats. That's 58.8% of all seats in the parliament. Moving forward, the DP may have additional support in parliamentary procedures from 13 other minor opposition lawmakers elected, representing the Saemildae, Rebuilding Korea, and Jinbo parties. Meanwhile, the PPP and its satellite will occupy a total of 106 seats. That's 36.1% of overall representation. The PPP may have support in parliament from 2 representatives elected from the New Reform Party. The DP won in many of the capital districts, taking victory in several key battlegrounds along the so-called Hangang River Belt. Traditionally liberal Jeolla-do provinces and traditionally battleground Chungcheongdo province voted in favor of the main opposition. Meanwhile, the PPP won fewer seats in the capital region but did secure traditionally conservative districts in Gangnam-gu. Historically conservative Gyeongsangdo province also voted mostly in favor of the ruling party. This distribution isn't vastly different from the previous 21st Assembly elected 4 years ago. As we've seen in the previous large opposition small ruling parliament, the opposition now has the opportunity to take control of parliamentary moves with its numbers, leaving the Yoon administration without the momentum needed to push through its objectives. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
Let's find out more about the situation with the ruling and main opposition parties. We go straight to our correspondent Shin Ha-young, who has been following it all at the National Assembly. Ha-young, were there any updates for the DP over the night?
Good morning, Dami. I'm currently at the National Assembly, close to where the ruling and main opposition parties operated their headquarters yesterday. And following cheers and applause regarding the exit polls yesterday, there weren't any new official remarks from the main opposition Democratic Party so far regarding the overall vote count throughout the night, other than the DP leader Lee Jae-myung, who is also the co-chair of the election campaign committee, saying that he would watch the results until the end. However, regarding his victory in Incheon's Gaeangbi district, there were some remarks from him. He said that the voters' choice is a judgment of the government and an act of giving the DP and him the responsibility to create a better world by taking responsibility for people's livelihoods issues. And meanwhile, the DP's election campaign committee is scheduled to convene a meeting on Thursday at 10 a.m. to deliver an official message about the 22nd general election.
Right, and I'm sure things are looking quite different for the PPP. How are they taking it?
Well, Tommy, there haven't been any official comments so far from the ruling People Power Party since before its interim leader Han Dong-un left the headquarters yesterday, where he said that despite the party's efforts to do politics that follows the people's will, the exit polls are disappointing. And instead, there will be an official announcement from Han at 11 a.m. today. And in the meantime, one official from the PPP's election campaign committee said it's quite shocking to see such results despite the best efforts from each regional candidate and Han, while raising concerns over dominance in the legislature. And with the PPP failing to secure the majority of the National Assembly seats, further conflict is expected, with the opposition party pushing various bills by designating them as fast-track bills and the president exercising his veto power for the remainder of his term. And that's all I have for this hour, and I'll have more updates for the later newscast. Back to you, Dami.
All right, our correspondent Shinayon live from the National Assembly. Thank you. And this year's election saw the highest participation rate in more than 3 decades. Now, encouragement for early voting was behind the record figure. Pansy reports.
The voter turnout rate for this year's election was 67%. According to the National Election Commission, out of about 44 million eligible voters, nearly 30 million Koreans have cast their ballots at polling stations nationwide to elect 300 lawmakers at the National Assembly. This is the highest figure in 32 years since 1992, when 70% voter turnout was recorded. In fact, the turnout for early voting, which took place last week from Friday to Saturday, reached 31.28%. Marking the highest early voting turnout for general elections since it was first implemented in 2014. Almost half of the early voters were those in their 50s and 60s, followed by those in their 40s and 70s. This comes after the ruling party and the main opposition party leaders have repeatedly urged voters to cast their ballots.
Consolidation of support from a conservative party and a progressive party, that too is reflected in the voter turnout. It seems that it was important which side went out to vote more.
The high voter turnout also comes after the country decided to disclose the real-time status of early voting ballot boxes to the public using CCTV cameras, further encouraging voters to cast their ballots. 배은지, Arirang News.
So the DP retains a majority in the National Assembly. Now, what does this indicate for the next 4 years? We're joined by Professor Min Jung-woo this morning. Welcome.
Good morning.
So let's start with the voter turnout, which came to 67%. What's your take on this?
Well, as you mentioned, the turnout of this general election is 16%. And generally speaking, the voter turnout of the general election in South Korea, it's a little bit lower than that of the president elections.
Right.
For example, the turnout of the president election in 2022 was the 77.1%. So we can see that the voter turnout in general elections is about the 10% difference, or the lower than the president elections in recent years. Anyway, the voter turnout of the general election this time is the highest general election turnout since 1992, and it's higher than the 4 years ago by 0.8%. And as you mentioned in the briefing, the turnout of the early voting this time is 31.3%. And it's 4.6% higher than the 4 years ago. So it seems that the increase of the early voting mainly contributed to the higher voter turnout of this general election. And higher voter turnout this time reflects that South Korean voters got higher interest getting involved in the national politics this time.
Definitely. Then we now have to talk about the election results. What are you reading into this resounding victory that the South Korean people handed to the DP?
Well, the outcome of the general election shows that South Korean voters supported the opposition parties much more than ruling party. And the main opposition Democratic Party will take the 174 out of the 300 seats in total, while the ruling party will just take the 109 out of 300 seats. And more importantly, the wider the opposition bloc will take 188 out of the 300 seats, and which included the Rebuilding Korea Party, whose leader is Jo-guk, the former Secretary of the Justice Department in the previous administration. And the party is expected to receive 12 proportional seats. So it shows that this general election is a typical of the midterm elections, which is held in the middle of the current administration, and its main feature is voters' assessments of the current administration and the ruling party. So the outcome of this general election suggests that South Korean people did not like the past performance of the current administration and the ruling party, and sent a strong signal to the presidential office and the ruling party that it needed to take more more care of what South Korean people want,
right,
and to the better for the rest of its terms.
Definitely. Now, analyzing the results, let's dissect it by region. Now, any regions or areas of the country that surprised you personally?
Well, we need to take care of, pay attention to the results of the Seoul and the Gyeonggi province metropolitan areas, and also the Daejeon and Chungcheong,
right,
the provinces. Because first, it has been known that Seoul and Gyeonggi province, which over half of the total voters in the country live in, they have had significant impacts on the overall outcome of the South Korean general elections. And that trend is also applied to the results of this general election. And the main opposition party received much more votes than the ruling party in Seoul and Gyeonggi province this time too. And along with the vote decisions in the Seoul and Gyeonggi province, it is also important to consider, as you mentioned, the vote decisions in the Daejeon and Chungcheong, which are located in the middle of the country, and they have been considered as the casting votes in national elections in South Korea. And their votes show well how South Korean voters perceive the national conditions of the election. And this time, in most congressional districts in the region, the main opposition party, Democratic Party candidates, defeated their opponents, ruling party candidates. So, and it is also contributed to the victory of the opposition party this time.
Professor Min, then I have to ask you, how will or what the election results, what kind of changes will bring to the state affairs, especially for the Yoon administration?
Well, basically, in terms of the victory of the opposition party, it could be more challenging for the current administration to implement domestic politics. And the opposition Democratic Party will have bigger voice in implementing domestic policies based on the victory of this general election. It means that it would be harder for the current administration and ruling party to pass legislations in the National Assembly, because the opposition bloc has got the supermajority in Congress. So we may see more situations that the ruling party and opposition parties will make negotiations to pass legislations, but the lead will be taken by the opposition party. It means that the National Assembly will be dominated by the opposition bloc for the upcoming 4 years.
So we should expect more talks and negotiations between the two.
Yes.
Now, what are some immediate economic policy measures that we should expect the DP to press ahead with now that they've won?
Well, basically, the economic policies are mainly implemented by the executive branch, like the presidential office and the financial departments, not by the National Assembly. So I don't think that there will be the significant or the immediate economic policy shifts or changes in the coming months. Instead, the current administration will maintain its economic policy orientations for the rest of the year. But when the executive branch and the National Assembly will talk about economic policies the next year in terms of negotiating the national budget, then we may see more progressive policies could be considered. But it's not clear at this point how much they are willing to negotiate and cooperate to pass legislations next year because there will be the political disputes and the conflicts between the two major parties.
Definitely. Professor Min, before I let you go briefly, what about on the diplomatic front? Will there be a major shift in policy directions?
Well, like the economic policies, I don't think that there will be a major shift in the diplomatic policies directions in the coming years, because like the economic policies, diplomacy and foreign policies will mainly be made and implemented by the executive branch, like the Presidential Office and Department of Foreign Affairs. And the public opinion polls have shown that foreign policy is one of the areas that the current administration is positively assessed by the public, South Korean, the public. So there will be a little change in terms of the implementing foreign policy, and for parliament elections in the coming years. So the current administration will maintain its foreign policy directions like the strengthening the ROK-US alliance, the improving trilateral cooperation among South Korea, US, and Japan, and the enhancing cooperation with the like-minded countries like the European nations, European unions, Canada, and Australia, something like that.
Right, they should be more on the same page on that in the field of diplomacy.
Yeah.
All right, Professor Min, thank you so much for your insights this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And this year's election also appears to be of great interest in countries around the world, with multiple outlets reporting on how the election results will set the tone for the rest of the president's term. Choi Min-jung reports.
The parliamentary elections have received a great deal of attention beyond South Korea's own borders. Foreign media outlets have highlighted that Wednesday's election is a crucial test for President Yoon Suk-yeol. After the polls closed at 6 p.m., the New York Times reported that the president is facing the threat of being a lame duck for the remaining 3 years in office. One expert told the Associated Press that Yoon, who has been grappling with low approval ratings, would find it difficult to move forward even a single step on state affairs. Another expert told Reuters that this election is a retrospective of the president's performance, rather than a choice about future policy issues. Several foreign media outlets, including the British newspaper The Guardian, highlighted what's been dubbed as the Green Onion outcry, which ignited voter anger in South Korea. Sources reported that the president and his party felt the heat after visiting a supermarket last month with the intention of promoting government efforts to lift financial pressures. Yoon had said less than $1 for a bundle of green onions is a reasonable price when the actual retail price is 3 or 4 times more. Foreign media outlets said that this made the president appear out of touch amid a lack of real progress to stabilize prices and livelihoods. Corruption allegations have also been a topic of interest overseas. Reuters and Al Jazeera underlined the Dior bag scandal involving the accusation that First Lady Kim Gun-hee broke the law by accepting a Dior bag as a gift. Reuters also mentioned that Yoon faced a backlash after appointing former Defense Minister Lee Jong-seop as the country's ambassador to Australia, while Lee was under a corruption probe. Meanwhile, Al Jazeera has pointed out that the main opposition Democratic Party is not free from such issues, with the party's chairman Lee Jae-myung facing corruption charges. And despite escalating tensions on the Korean peninsula, Reuters and AFP reported that North Korea is not a major issue in the election. Reuters said little change is expected in the diplomatic arena, whatever the result. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Detail.
지정학적 갈등이 심화되고 있는 현 국제 정세 가운데에서 우리나라 동포들이 느끼고 있는 불안감이 상당히 큽니다. 이러한 불안감이 조금이라도 덜어지는 사회 분위기를 형성하는데 일조해 주실 것으로 기대합니다.
스웨덴에 살면서 행복하게 뛰어노는 아이들과 가족들을 많이 보게 되는데요. 한국 사회에도 이러한 가족들이 많아질 수 있도록 부모 간에 평등하게 아이를 책임질 수 있는 사회와 아이들이 충분히 넉넉하게 행복할 수 있는 환경을 위해 노력해 주셨으면 좋겠습니다.
분열이 발생하고 갈등이 이전보다 더 격해진 것 같습니다. 특정 집단이나 특정 인물이 아닌 국민 모두를 위한 국회가 되었으면 좋겠습니다.
대도시가 아닌 지역에 거주하는 제 국민들은 투표 하나를 하기 위해서 큰 돈 혹은 시간을 써서 그 투표소에 가서 이제 투표를 해야 하는 고충이 있습니다. 투표소가 더 많이 만들어졌으면 좋겠다라는 생각을 하고 또한 제 국민이 투표를 하려면은 사전 신청을 해야 되는데 이러한 면들이 더 많이 홍보가 되었으면 좋겠습니다.
한국에서 합법적으로 외국인 근로자로 취업할 수 있는 법적 근거를 만들어 주시면 좋겠습니다. 또한 이주 여성들이 조금 더 전문적인 일자리에 예를 들어 심리상담사, 이주 여성 동료 심리상담사 같은 일자리에 진출할 수 있는 기반을 만들어 주시면 좋겠습니다.
U.S. President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida reaffirmed their commitment to work together on denuclearizing North Korea. Also, for the first time, Biden showed his support for Japan's outreach to the North. Lee Seung-jae has more.
U.S. President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida met for a summit at the White House on Wednesday, where the two leaders discussed an array of issues related to North Korea. In the joint statement issued after the talks, Biden and Kishida reaffirmed their commitment to the complete denuclearization of North Korea in accordance with relevant UNSC resolutions, while also condemning North Korea's continued development of its ballistic missile program, including through launches of intercontinental ballistic missiles and space launch vehicles using ballistic missile technologies, which poses a grave threat to peace and security on the Korean Peninsula and beyond. The two leaders also reaffirmed their openness to holding talks with North Korea.
We both agree that DPRK must also address the serious human rights and humanitarian concerns of the international community, including the immediate resolution of the abduction issue. But you know, the Prime Minister has just spoken to the potential, what his plans may mean, but I welcome the opportunity, we welcome the opportunity of our allies to initiate dialogue with the Democratic Republic of Korea.
In their joint statement, the two leaders also called on North Korea to return to dialogue without precondition. However, the North has stressed that any summit between Kim Jong-un and Kishida will be held without discussions on Japanese abductees and the denuclearization of the regime. They also expressed concerns over growing cooperation between North Korea and Russia, while calling for faithful enforcement of anti-Pyongyang sanctions, despite Moscow's veto of a UNSC resolution to extend the mandate of an expert panel monitoring sanctions implementation. During Wednesday's summit, the two leaders also announced an array of agreements, including upgrading their country's command and control structures, creating an air defense architecture between the U.S., Australia, and Japan, and deepening people-to-people exchanges. Biden also stressed the improved relations between Seoul and Tokyo, saying President Yoon Suk-yeol decided to heal all wounds and start a new chapter of friendship. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Hopes of the U.S. Central Bank lowering interest rates in the summer have been shut down, with recent meeting notes released by policymakers and March's consumer price report. Our Moon Hae-dan has the details.
U.S. Federal Reserve officials are concerned that inflation isn't coming down fast enough, and traders now expect rate cuts later in the year than originally forecast. On Wednesday, the Fed released the minutes from its latest meeting in March, which saw another freeze in the U.S. benchmark interest rates in the range of 5.25 and 5.5%. The meeting notes revealed a more pessimistic stance towards rate cuts from policymakers, citing uncertainties in being able to lower inflation towards the Fed's 2% target. Some participants reportedly predicted that longer-term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, with others commenting that geopolitical risks could result in higher energy prices. After expectations that interest rates would be lowered in June, economists now predict that rate cuts could come in the Fed's meeting scheduled in September, given this latest commentary. The sentiment was supported by the U.S. Consumer Price Index for March announced by the Labor Department on the same day, showing that consumer prices rose 3.5% compared to the same month the year before. This is in fact higher than the 3.2% on-year rise seen in February. It's also the highest rise since last September, supporting Fed Chair Jerome Powell's comments that it's a sometimes bumpy road to bring inflation down. With the U.S. CPI seeing 3 straight months of high readings, experts are saying that this might not just be businesses raising prices at the start of the year as economists had previously argued. Following the Fed's meeting notes, U.S. President Joe Biden acknowledged that while there could be delays in interest rate cuts, he stood by his prediction that these cuts could come by the end of the year. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Good morning. It's forecast to be a rainy day for the capital area in Gangwon-do province. The capital will see rain going away around lunchtime, while Gangwon-do could see rain through the late afternoon. Meanwhile, Jeolla-do provinces and Jeju will see passing rain during the day today. It really won't rain much, 1 to 5 millimeters of sprinkles in store, but brace for strong winds and thunderstorms if you're in Jeolla-do and nearby areas. Today's rain won't help much to ease the dryness in the air, with a dry advisory remaining in place for Seoul and surrounding areas. Wet clouds will just hide the sunshine behind the clouds today. Daytime highs will be similar to yesterday, hovering around 20 degrees Celsius in most parts of the country. But sunshine and warmth return tomorrow, and by Sunday, Seoul will see a high of 27 degrees. Meanwhile, rain is in the forecast for Jeju from tomorrow into Sunday. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Friday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's lying? Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
웰컴. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
시장입니다. 스탠바이. 스타트.
I'm just trying to play cool, but I just can't hide that I want you. Like it's magnetic. Super economic. Like it's magnetic. Super economic. say no.
Welcome. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? Welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
We're here to make a new type of news. New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's April 11th here in Seoul. I'm Yoon, and you're watching News Generation. Joining me in the studio is Chiji. Good morning. Good morning. And Jessica Dainon.
Happy morning, everyone.
Happy Thursday. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Since nearly 70% of the country's doctors walked out of their posts in protest against the government's drive to expand med school admission slots from next year, the number of patients who use telemedicine services has jumped sixfold. In February, the Health Ministry decided to fully allow telemedicine services at all hospitals and clinics. Most who use these services were diagnosed with a cold. Moving on, overnight, the makeup of South Korea's National Assembly for the next 4 years was decided on. The main opposition Democratic Party retained a majority in the 22nd general elections on Wednesday. Most of the final results only came out a few hours ago. Many Korean households were wide awake watching the poll results come out live. Delivery apps in Korea expected to see sales surge, as has always been the case on previous election nights. Back in 2020, during the 21st general election, the number of people who ordered in through the popular app Penny soared by 31% compared to the previous week. The most popular dish delivered was chicken. Now, another way to keep the attention of the public on election night was by making creative, fun content on the parliamentary candidates. The BBC highlighted how anyone who switched on their TV set in Korea last night had their pick of exciting viewing options, such as parliamentary candidates starring in romantic melodramas or fighting it out on a famous Hollywood train. They noted how Korean broadcasters used their creative flair and top-notch computer graphics to vie for a higher viewership and ratings compared to other broadcasters covering the same election results. The BBC even said the way broadcasters showed the election results and the parliamentary candidates race was like a K-drama. While the graphics by Korean broadcasting stations did garner attention for being entertaining and amusing, Some shed light on the lack of information broadcasters seem to provide, such as information on critical social issues like childbirth, education, or healthcare. Now, here in the studio, what do you guys think about the way broadcasters here cover important political dates like the general election results yesterday?
You know, I actually watched the presidential election, and I remember it was my first time sort of watching it in Korea, and I was amazed at the graphics and the CG. I do distinctly remember my grandma and my grandpa, and we were watching, and we were actually having fun, laughing. Where, you know, presidential election or elections like these can get really competitive and sort of tense. I think the humor sort of alleviated the tension, particularly for me. But I do understand that when it gets too far, then it can take away the light from the importance of social issues and, you know, some of the actual promises that they're making. However, in my personal opinion, it's at the end where everything is done and we're awaiting the results. I think it is a little, you know, I think it's okay to alleviate the tension a little bit, sit back, laugh a little bit, and await the results.
And connecting it to the second news story we covered on our news feed, if you're delivering chicken and eating with your family and watching your TV set to see the results, I think it's once in a while okay to see the fun graphics come about.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, what about you? What were your thoughts?
Well, I believe that election broadcasting should strike a balance between providing both entertainment and information. So I was watching one of the three major broadcasters in the country last night, and I noticed that the way they portrayed the candidates as game characters was very funny, humorous, very creative. It was very similar to the presidential elections as well. But I feel like it also diverted attention away from the actual content of the election.
True.
So while the graphics were creative, I think it's important to focus on the substance of the election rather than just the entertainment factor.
Because at the end of the day, it is such an integral calendar date in our political calendar, and we need to be covering important issues there. And speaking of the elections, we're just coming back from hearing the results, and we saw the highest participation rate in more than 3 decades. The National Election Commission said out of about 44 million eligible voters, nearly 30 million cast their ballots, and that's a whopping 67% turnout. And just before on Tuesday's episode, we heard from a political science expert, Professor James C. Shaw from Keimyung University, that said though the turnout rate for voters in their 20s and 30s may be lower compared to other generations, young Koreans are doing a relatively good job practicing their rights to vote. And now that the results are in, I would like to ask our panelists whether they've actually took their part in casting your ballots and helping decide the makeup of the new 300-member National Assembly.
Well, I did. I went to vote yesterday since I didn't go during the early voting period. And as we've previously discussed the importance of exercising our right to vote, I made sure to also be well informed before casting my vote on election. As you see, I also took a photo to prove myself that I did vote. And I reviewed the campaign materials I received via post, which we all do, read through the different policies set forth, really skimmed through it by various parties and the background of each candidate before heading to the voting station. There weren't many people at the station, perhaps because I went around noon, and I feel like most people would have gone in the morning and then enjoyed the rest of their day off. And I'm proud to have exercised my democratic right to vote. And did you, by the way, know that the value of a single vote is worth about 59 million Korean won, which is about 43,000 US dollars?
I did not know that.
Single vote. So that's calculated by dividing the total election cost by the number of eligible voters. So I'm glad that I didn't waste that.
And gee, I must say, now that I know that it costs about 60 million won, I think I definitely exercised that worth by being a voter in South Korea here as well. I too went. It was a lovely day. And I actually went towards the end. And one of the things that I've noticed also in the presidential election is that in Korea, everything is so organized. It was very speedy. I showed my ID card and I was directly led to a ballot. And as you can see, I did the so-called the fist. You're not supposed to show any signs of the political parties that you're voting. And as you can see, there are some places that people do line up, but fortunately the places that I went to, people were very speedy. And one thing that I noticed was that the volunteers at the ballot were actually very young, and I saw a lot of young people coming in to vote. So that is definitely something new that I've noticed about the voting trends these years.
Yeah, and I went to vote myself as well. Just before our noon coverage of the elections, I found the time to go to one of the thousands of polling sites. Not a lot of people were there, and I think many cast their ballots during the early voting period, which was last Friday and Saturday. And that's when we also saw a record turnout rate. And as soon as I came out of the polling site, though, I saw many voters around my age taking pictures, as we've just seen on the screen. You guys took a few.
Yes.
So did you guys take any pictures yourselves, and why did you do that? And does that show any trend among our generation?
Well, as you saw earlier, I did take a photo myself, a selfie, and of the confirmation sheet I received as proof of having voted. So if you tried, no offense, but to try to prove yourself by stamping on your hand, it's not what the millennials and Gen Zs do these days, because they actually have prepared special papers to stamp voting marks on instead of stamping the mark on their hands. And it actually began during the COVID-19 period because they didn't want the virus to spread. And these special papers reflect their personality, often featuring objects of their fascination, or even their favorite girl band or boy band, or even a favorite baseball team. And on Instagram and other social media platforms, a variety of proof shots are currently trending as well. And another notable trend is to use the ballot stamp, which kind of looks like the Korean consonant Eung, like the round-shaped consonant, to fill in blanks for phrases supporting their favorite sports clubs or even promoting K-dramas. And I think uploading these proofs on social media can really be a double-edged sword, but I personally think it can really create a sense of responsibility among young eligible voters to make sure that they're motivated to vote and participate in the voting as well. And in fact, some say that they were motivated to go vote because they wanted to stamp on their special papers.
I know. I think that's another way to boost youth political participation, because even though it could be a fun social media trend, at least you're getting them to come out of their houses and cast their ballots. Now, what do you think about this?
I mean, now that Jihi says that you're not young when you put it on your fist, I don't know what to say, because I felt awkward just taking that picture too. So even though I am part of the MZ generation, I don't think I follow the trend. But obviously, as you can see, we like to do everything on social media. So there is definitely a sort of a thread or a challenge that goes on when it comes to the voting buzz as well. But one of the things that has been happening in South Korea is, as Jihi mentioned, the photo cast, but also celebrities have become a quite crucial part in leading the young generation to go and vote. They have been, especially K-pop stars, they have been very active in sort of publishing their voting testimonials and actually some of the encouraging people to vote. Now, obviously, when you're taking these, voting shots, you're not supposed to go into the ballot and take these shots or reveal anything about the political party. But I think this is one of the trends that has, as you mentioned, it's definitely sort of motivating people to try, even if they just want to get a photo out of it.
Exactly, and as you mentioned, you're not allowed to take any photos inside the polling stations, but nowadays, because so many people are doing it, there's photo zones outside, and if you do not keep the rules, you might be fined up to $2,933 US or up to 2 years in prison. So make sure to keep these rules for your next casting ballot time. Now, it's not just our generation that practiced our right to vote yesterday. Some 223,000 naturalized Korean citizens were also eligible, and we're going to hear from one ourselves to better compare what Korea's election sites and voting culture is like compared to other parts of the world. We're going to include a naturalized Korean citizen in our talks. It's Professor Roy Alokkumar from Busan University of Foreign Studies, who's living in Busan right now. Professor Roy naturalized from India to South Korea in 2011. So welcome, Professor Roy.
Hello, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Now, I'd like to ask you the first question. Yesterday was the 22nd general election here in Korea. Did you vote as a naturalized citizen, and what was it like?
Oh, yes, I did. This is my civic duty, and as usual, I did it. And I also noticed the enthusiasm that people had and even the young people, the first-timers, they wanted to have a say in democracy in Korea. Then the place where I was supposed to vote, it was a bit high up the hill. And I could see many old people also coming. One thing that really astonished me this time was that nobody was surprised to see me in the queue. It seems Korea has changed a lot.
That's really nice to hear. Given that we are accepting more naturalized citizens and more foreign visitors in the country, I do think South Korea is on its way of becoming a melting pot for sure.
It has already become. It has already become, I would say, and it has become a attractive destination for many foreigners, not only tourists but also foreign workers. And international marriage is also growing every day. So I think this is a very positive thing. Korea has become much diverse in its demography, and it is visible too.
I see. Well, Professor Kumar, as a person who's experienced the Korean election and the Indian election as well, what's the election process like in Korea compared to India? What are the differences?
Well, first thing is the size. In India, the elections are going to start this April, the general election on 19th. And this will continue till the 1st of June, 44 days process. Because the country being very big, they cannot hold an election on the same day. So that is one major difference. And then, of course, there are many similarities as well. Like anger-mongering has become a trend in democracy. So India is very loud these days, just as Korea was. And because of the digital device that people have in hand, one can plant a thorn in the air very easily. I saw that in Korea, and I see that in India as well. And one thing I regret, though, I mean, instead of dividing the votes or dividing the people's mind, there should have been an attempt to reach a consensus on many issues, and that sometimes is missing. And it is because I think a stink reaches the nose faster than the fragrance. But this also presents a challenge to most of the people who are elected this time to go to the National Assembly and find something more useful. In India, we have a multi-party system, but still we have alliances where parties reach a consensus and they make alliances. So there are two major alliances, NDA and other one is India. In Korea, alliances are building, I would say, but sometimes the personal aggression is more visible in Korea.
Right.
Professor, you mentioned that as a naturalized citizen, it's very important to practice your civic duty. Is there one thing that you hope from a new parliament?
I expect that the new parliament pays attention to policies that relate to immigrants or naturalized citizens. I know they are keen, but sometimes the number or the constituency is not big enough to attract their attention. And this is where sometimes the blind spots are created. So I would prefer the new leaders, new assembly members. They are more keen to get the feedback from the foreigners like me and also use that in policy making. This input is important. And more important is, I believe, the inclusiveness in policy making of these foreigners.
For sure. Professor Roy, you mentioned great points there. As South Korea is heading towards, we're seeing a super aged society, low birth rates, immigration does play a key role, and hopefully the new parliament better tackles and addresses the needs of naturalized citizens and foreign workers here, or immigrant married couples as well. Hopefully we'll see some changes soon. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and actually casting a ballot.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Now, before ending off today's discussion, I would like to ask our two panelists in the studio, what do you think this time around was different compared to previous elections in the past?
Well, I think there was a little more participation. Actually, this turned out to be the highest turnout when it comes to general elections in the country. And also, I was quite curious as to how long those ballots were, because we've been talking about how it's going to be super long this time. And when I went to vote yesterday, it was quite long. I was quite surprised.
You had to fold it like three times. Apparently, it was 51.7 centimeters with 38 political parties running. So it was a really long ballot, hence why we had to wait for hours for the results to come out. We're still seeing some come in. Francesca, what about you? What was different for you in terms of your experience voting?
In addition to the voting experiences, I think the climate that I was in when I was voting, I think was also quite particular. I mean, I think we're at a time where we're facing, low birth rate and also a crisis in the medical system. So I think going in, there was a lot that I was thinking about in terms of which party could better service the country. And I think sort of the climate that I was in was quite different from the other previous elections that I was in.
Exactly. And speaking of better accommodating to the demands, especially when we're living in such high inflation times and socio-economically straining ones, I do think that we need to speak on behalf of young Koreans out there as to what type of pledges we would now like to see come to life.
Well, before talking about specific pledges, I'd like to say that I'd like to see a lot more inclusive policies coming forth, because many youth tend to fall in the middle gray zone where they're not super rich or they don't even fall in the lower quota of the income ladder. So many of them cannot enjoy the benefits provided by the government. So I think they should also be inclusively covered as well. And of course, we still have housing problems that is a huge burden to our youth. So I think we should see more public housings, affordable public housings being provided to the youth as well.
Exactly. And as you mentioned, I think because we're so outnumbered by older voters out there during this election, it was the first time those in their 60s outnumbered those in their 20s and 30s combined. I feel like our generation feels outnumbered and sometimes underrepresented. And hopefully this election sheds light to actually the fact that because it's an aging society, inevitably we're going to be seeing older voters out there. But hopefully if we see more youth politicians make up the National Assembly, I do think that will boost our political participation rates and our enthusiasm to actually have our voices heard. Now, what are your thoughts on that?
I love the comment that you made, but I also think that it goes vice versa, as in more of us have to actually participate and increase the rate of 20 and 30 voters for the people, the elected officials, to actually take notice to say the participation of young people and their votes do count in terms of winning the seats. So I love the comment that you made, but I do hope that the people that are watching this, including ourselves, do exercise that right to make sure that our voices are heard. And then making sure that we do exercise a civic duty, including myself, of course.
Exactly, because there are certain policies and pledges that we would like to see come to life. What are some of yours?
I think for me, as Jihi mentioned, housing I think is very important, but one of the polls that I saw for the young voters, the most important thing is inflation and just the prices of living costs generally. I mean, people are just starting to get careers, kick-started or trying to make their way into society, and the first thing that they have to think about is making a living with the limited salary or the income that they get. So I think inflation is definitely one of the most important one. And here in NewsGen, we've covered it several times, but I think youth support in terms of the disenfranchised, disabled, and people who are not necessarily in the spotlight for the majority. I think those are some of the very important social systems that need to come into place to boost the entire system altogether.
And as Professor Roy mentioned, including even the naturalized citizens, foreign migrants. So at the end of the day, I think our key word is inclusivity.
Exactly. And I just want to mention that because our politicians, their parties are quite divided now, I want to make sure that policies come first, not the political quarrel between them, because I think the youth stay very ignorant or nonchalant when it comes to political matters because their voices aren't being heard, and it's the quarrel that's always going on between these figures.
The power play that becomes more important rather than the actual policies.
So I want to make sure that even though the politicians fall into different parties, they make sure to put the policies first so that they do affect the youth.
Because at the end of the day, that's why each vote counts in order for our needs to be better delivered and for the National Assembly to better represent everyone, including everyone, and making sure that each voice is heard. And hopefully we'll see some changes soon. Now, in the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Choi Ji-hee.
Thank you.
And Jessica Dainong.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you.
All right. And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are News Generation.
Welcome